Let's take a brief look at how psychoeducational and psychobehavioral assessments work with vision. First of all, let's look at what these words mean. Psychoeducational assessments, or batteries, are formalized testing protocols administered to children and adults to determine suitability to and capacity for classroom learning or for a particular career or training path. These involve tests of varied parts of cognition and perception, sometimes called intelligence, and sometimes emotional, that is to say, affective skills and awareness. Psychomotor assessments include tests that measure motor skills, so how the brain controls the arms, legs, but mostly hands and eyes. It makes sense to measure what's going on when a child struggles, to know more precisely where skills are strong and where they are not. Testing is most often conducted at the outset when a child has self-identified as needing extra attention, and so we already know there's a problem. In most cases, children with visual functional limitations will show moderate to severe deficits in both psychoeducational and psychomotor scoring. This makes perfect sense. If there are obstacles to locating and receiving visual signals, then the brain processing based on that bad data will also be flawed, lacking, or inaccurate. Visual impediments to learning and development, or VILD, take many forms, and these will interfere with signal creation, transmission, and processing in different ways. Likewise, when VILD are combined, their effects will vary. For some children, small system errors will lead to greater effects depending on pre-existing conditions and sensitivities. For most children, mild VILD will lead to non-specific complaints around academics, things like headache, fatigue, intolerance to reading, or inattention. Moderate VILD will often lead to headaches and facial and eye strain, but will also look a lot more like DSM-type conditions, such as attention and reading deficits, emotional lability, and defiance. Heavy or profound VILD will tend to affect coordination, speech as well as reading and writing, and balance. These children will appear to have serious developmental disorders. This is so predictable that a good clinician should be able to describe a child's learning and physical behaviors largely based on visual functional assessment alone. It's worth noting that many visual functional barriers and their effects can be fairly easily demonstrated in clinic. Follow me on this for a minute. So, we know we are primarily visual beings, and we learn and navigate most efficiently using primarily a visual spatial model of cognition. We also know that vision is exceptionally complex in how we receive information, process it, and even more complicated in how we direct our gaze to consider targets of interest. It follows then that if one or several elements in visual processing and function are faulty, then these failed inputs to visual function will impact on the quality of signal that is received, and then also on the accuracy of target acquisition. It is a wonder to me then, and to many others, that we virtually ignore vision when conducting psychoeducational testing. Given vision's central role in human motor control and cognition, we cannot nor should not assume that vision is a non-issue, a marginal factor in the testing itself for any particular child. In fact, we simply have to look at who tends to show up in post-secondary studies to know that children with hyperopia or farsightedness are less likely to achieve academically. The myopes, or nearsighted students, who are comfortable reading at close proximity tend to excel. Asking a child with hyperopia, astigmatism, or any other significant VILD to do days' worth of paper and pencil testing is tantamount to asking the same child to walk to school with a 50-pound pack on their back. Then, when they falter, we refer to the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Disorders, 5th edition, to give us a diagnosis we can treat. It's noteworthy that all the emphasis on testing for learning and behavior concerns has led to massive increases in profits for testing organizations like Pearson.com, the American Psychiatric Association, and scores of pharmaceutical companies. It's equally noteworthy, but also alarming, that nowhere in the DSM-5 does it even acknowledge visual function as an element to consider or rule out prior to rendering a diagnosis. There are no optometrists on the review panel and no vision scientists. One finds that there is also a very heavy bias towards diagnostic paradigms that will lead to pharmaceutical solutions. From a study in 2006, right around the time of the second to last revision of the DSM. Conclusions. Our inquiry into the relationships between DSM panel members and the pharmaceutical industry demonstrates that there are strong financial ties between the industry and those who are responsible for developing and modifying the diagnostic criteria for mental illness. The connections are especially strong in those diagnostic areas where drugs are the first line of treatment for mental disorders. Full disclosure by DSM panel members of their financial relationships with for-profit entities that manufacture drugs used in treatment of mental illnesses is recommended. It seems at times that not only is the connection strongest when a drug is first-line treatment, but that drugs may well be pushed as preferred treatments above other options. Vision, then, becomes a marginal issue because the profits are simply not there. Digging a little deeper, but not too deep, 8 years later, in 2014, when pediatric prescribing was hitting new record highs, another article reported, "Increased transparency and mandatory disclosure policies for DSM-5 panel members alone may not be robust enough strategies to prevent the appearance of bias in both the DSM revision process as well as clinical decisions about appropriate intervention for DSM disorders." No doubt, when we know what the conclusion ought to be, we tend to bias our diagnosis in that direction. It's a form of blindness that is driven by multiple factors, including deficient education, heavy bias in training and research, profit motive, social and professional expectations and norms, and others. When a clinician reports to me that there is nothing wrong with a child's eyes but they have visual processing deficits, I immediately have doubts. I want to know more about the child's visual function before I believe any test scores that reflect diminished cognitive or perceptual performance. I know that when you address the inputs, the processing and outputs are stronger, more reliable, easier to achieve. A last note. Psychoeducational testing will cost from $5,000 to $10,000 and is absolutely torturous for most children. Still, I have yet to see a psychologist report in any informed way on a child's visual functional status as part of that report, only that a child may or may not have visual processing deficits. Also, I have yet to meet a family doctor who records visual functional status prior to prescribing medications, or who can easily describe the behavioral effects of farsightedness, for example. At the same time, I have also yet to see a child who undergoes visual training who does not far exceed their initial psychoeducational and psychomotor benchmarks. When we address the basic machine, that is the inputs to vision, skills improve, behavior improves, mood improves. While testing and treatment are great for profit margins, those profits would more certainly lead to better results for more parents and children if they were funneled first into meaningful whole child development strategies and detection programs for basic visual deficits.